If, like me, you'd hoped that was the conclusion to all of this, especially if you've now sat through the however many minutes or hours I've probably been going on about all of it, then I'm afraid, like me, you'll be a little disheartened to know there is more, although only 2 more points. And this one, which is the follow-up to the sovereignty conclusion, is: if you worry about that because you don't like the Conservative government, look at the reality. Their majority in Parliament is very slim. They have been blocked on big decisions already. You are therefore not giving sovereignty to David Cameron, but to the UK House of elected representatives. Again with the elected, and again with the please go and look up the structure of the EU. We are represented in the EU through a democratic process. We have democratic process within the EU. We also have almost an undemocratic veto within the EU, and again we talk of Turkey. The government has a veto over new members. We can veto Turkey if our democratically elected representatives choose to in this country. Yeah, the elected thing comes up a lot. We actually are not part of the euro, we're not part of the Schengen zone. We have opt-outs and vetoes from bailouts and financial thises and that. We stand alone within Europe in terms of the special privileges we have been given by the EU. Somehow we're still asking for more. And, you know, we are allowed to basically get away with anything in the EU, well, almost anything. We are so privileged, the position that the EU has allowed us, that really, if anything, the EU should be looking at us and voting us out, because we're acting like spoiled children right now on this one. We really are. Anyway, this wants to cover the point about you are not giving sovereignty to David Cameron. Well, if it's all about sovereignty of the UK government, as the leader of the UK government, I would kind of suggest that for as long as he decides to stay Prime Minister, we are. So, again, this is one of these, you're not doing this, but you are doing this kind of arguments. Now, a vote to leave is not a vote to get rid of Cameron. A vote to remain is not a vote to keep him. He has politically slaughtered his career by bringing about this referendum and by his dreadful performance in the campaigning for this referendum. There's no way he can survive for any length of time. However, Boris Johnson and I think Michael Gove, I could be wrong on that, have both said, well, stay or go, he's still Prime Minister. So we're really not getting rid of him just on this vote. He will be going because he was daft enough to call this in the first place, run a terrible campaign, and it's just a mess. He is right. This is gambling the future of the country, the economy, the livelihood and welfare of people in it, and yet he's the one that chose to do it. So, believe me, after the referendum, it is time to give him a very hefty political kicking. But it is not the time to use the referendum to do that, because we're kicking ourselves. He's still going to be immensely rich and smug and happy on his thrones of gold, while we're the ones that would be suffering. So let's get this out of the way. This is not a referendum on David Cameron's popularity or Boris Johnson's popularity. You know, there's unpleasantness on both sides. This needs to be a referendum on the bigger picture than just some stuffed shirt, power-mad politicians. So, yeah. When it says about giving sovereignty, well, we would be giving sovereignty to our elected. It even says the UK House of Elected Representatives, which for now is David Cameron, and for the next 4 years is the Conservatives. Where it says their majority in Parliament is very slim, yes, but they still have a majority. If you're worried you don't like the Conservative government, well, again, nothing happens in a bubble. If we leave the EU, then somebody has to negotiate the terms under which we leave. That we have to come to various agreements and negotiations about the separation. We have to look through many laws that have been made with regard to us being in the EU that would have to be amended or rewritten. We will have to look at the frightening prospect of what this will do to the peace process in Northern Ireland. Who's going to be doing that when we've got a Conservative government for the next 4 years and we have to be spending 2 of those minimum The time limit is supposed to be 2 years, but the chances of it happening within 2 years are next to none. There's so much to do. But who are going to be the people overseeing that? Who are going to be the people negotiating these things? It's going to be the current government. Our UK House of elected representatives, no less. And who are they? They are the Conservatives. It is the Conservative Party. And they will be riding on a right-wing wave of success at this point as well. So it's going to be the elements of the Conservative Party that are less compassionate, shall we say, than others. And a less compassionate Conservative is a terrifying prospect indeed. So let's think about this in terms of the next 4 years and how much damage can be done by the economy taking a huge hit, if not a full-on recession, the loss of jobs due to just not being in the EU anymore and no longer being attractive to other countries, the issue of 2 million plus British people overseas, many of whom are pensioners with health problems who currently are using the health services in the likes of Spain and would be coming back here. We talk about the sacred NHS. There's going to be quite a burden on it if we're suddenly having a lot of elderly people. And this isn't an anti-age thing. Elderly people generally have higher levels of health problems than younger people. If they have to come back, they're going to be coming back without the money to buy a house. They're going to be coming back with probably ailments that require treatment. This is going to be a massive financial burden, which we will have created for ourselves. Because these people are perfectly happy with the situations they're in. That's why they're in them. We would be forcing it on them and ourselves. So we have to look at this picture and look at the climate it would be happening in, which is a more popularist, well, a right-wing Conservative Party bolstered by popular opinion based on a Leave vote. We are not going to have a socialist nirvana. I hear quite a few people saying we must leave the EU for socialist reasons. The EU does not look after socialist concerns. At its core, the EU actually isn't unsocialist, isn't anti-socialist. It's taken in certain directions, it's in no small part by our own government. But if we had the option of stay in the EU or have a socialist paradise the day after leaving, that could change the picture somewhat. But the reality is that we will have this, as people call it, neoliberal society. We will have moved further to a nationalistic ideology and to the far right, because nationalism and patriotism are two separate things. Nationalism is what causes people to do horrific and atrocious acts. Patriotism is just pride in your country, following your football team, waving a flag every so often, watching The Great Escape at Christmas. So when you look at the context within which a Leave vote would happen, I do think that we do very much have to consider the government we've got, the people who are in it, the ones that would be feeling empowered by a Leave vote. And I think we have every right to be scared in terms of civil liberties, in terms of workers' rights, in terms of the economy for industry, in terms of housing, in terms of public services. I think we very much do need to consider the government that is in power and will be in power during an exit and the negotiations and agreements made from there on.